Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Knight of the Kingdoms, Episode 1, The Hedge Knight, which is also the title of the first novella that this season is based on. And thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now, we did a whole video explaining the time and place of when this show takes place, but just in case you want a quick refresher, I'm going to briefly explain this universe to you. So, Game of Thrones primarily takes place on the continent of Westeros, which is loosely modeled on medieval England, but like on a massive scale. About 400 years before the events of this show, a family settles in Westeros called the Targaryens, and they're special because they ride dragons. Then the head of the house, Aegon, has a vision showing him that he needs to conquer Westeros so one day his heir can unite the kingdoms and fight ice zombies. So this is a Targaryen trait. They all have a bit of magic in their blood, which allows them to ride dragons and have prophetic dreams. Aegon then conquered the continent, well, most of it, and then his family ruled for about 100 years before they fell into civil war. That's the story of House of the Dragon, which takes place about 78 years before this show. After that war ended, the dragons slowly died out, and the Targaryens found it harder to hang on to their power. Then, about 12 years before this series, there was a second Targaryen civil war called the Blackfyre Rebellion. Now, this rebellion will probably have repercussions in this show because Dunk's late master, Sir Arlen, fought in this conflict. So the TLDR is that when King Aegon IV died, he legitimized all of his bastards. So one of them, Daemon Blackfyre, led a revolt to claim the Iron Throne. Great houses chose sides, and the highborn Targaryens won. But the scars still carry over into this show. Now, also as we go along, I'm going to compare what happens in the show to what happens in the novel. But the book does have some twists in it that we will not spoil here. So if you have read the book, good for you, but please don't spoil it for anybody in the comments below. So this show is set about 90 years before Game of Thrones. So the youngest Targaryens in this show will actually be the grandparents of Daenerys Targaryen. The main hero, Duncan the Tall, is actually mentioned in Game of Thrones. His name is dropped several times in the books, but only twice in the show. First, when old Nan is trying to comfort Bran after his fall.
I could tell you about Sir Duncan the Tall.
And the next time is when Joffrey is mocking his dad, Sir Jaime, about his lack of accomplishments that are noted in the Book of Brothers.
4 pages for Sir Duncan. He must have been quite a man.
So they say.
Now this actually leads to a sweet moment seasons later when Brienne adds Jaime's honorable deeds into the book. But all of that is in Dunk's future. In this series, he's just going to be a dumb yet honorable Hedge Knight. Now this show is going to tell a smaller, more personal story, so we won't see any of those giant pitched battles that Game of Thrones is known for. And that's too bad because I love a historically accurate battle scene, whether it's medieval or modern. Like I grew up on war movies like Saving Private Ryan, which featured grounded, realistic fighting. And now I can actually take command of those vehicles with the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, War Thunder. They're the sponsor of this video. Guys, War Thunder is available for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. The game lets me take command of more than 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations. Everything from biplanes and armored cars to fighter jets and tanks. The detail in this game is also insane, with realistic sound effects and graphics. Like, you don't just place generic hits on vehicles, you actually have to hit them at the same weak points that exist in real life, like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew. The game is free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and mobile, and if you download with our link in the description or pinned comment, you can join the more than 95 million players in PvP battles. Plus, if you use our link for a limited time, you get a massive bonus pack that is available for new and returning players that have not played in at least 6 months for PC and consoles. Bonuses include perks like multiple premium vehicles, exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of a premium account. Just click our link below and I'll see you in game. Now back to what I was saying. So let's dive into the episode. The opening shot of the oak tree is taken straight from the illustrations in the book, where Dunk also buried Sir Arlen under an oak tree. Dunk grew up in Flea Bottom. That's the rough part of King's Landing at the bottom of the hill where Gendry is from in the original show. Now Dunk holds high regard for Sir Arlen because he took him off the streets and taught him how to be a knight. Now the flashback shows Sir Arlen treating Dunk with disrespect, but he still loved the old man. The first words that Dunk speak tell us everything you need to know about the character.
I don't know the right words.
He wasn't brought up proper, and he knows that he is a lower caste of society, but he has a kind heart and doesn't resent Arlen for hitting him.
You never beat me when I didn't deserve it.
And yet, he still believes in fairness.
Except that time in Maidenpool. It was the inn boy ate the widow woman's pie, not me.
And Maidenpool, by the way, was name dropped in Season 2 of Game of Thrones. It's where Arya told Tywin Lannister that she was from.
Where are you from?
Maidenpool, my lord.
And actually more on Maidenpool later. And the last words he speaks to him are,
I'd leave your sword, but it would only rust in the ground.
And this is incredibly sweet. It tells us that he would like to do things the proper way, to bury a knight with his blade, but his economic situation means that he can't always do things the proper way. And then finally his emotions boil over into one heartbreaking sentence.
Wish you didn't die, sir.
And then he makes him a promise.
Take good care of the horses.
As Thunder, Sweetfoot, and Chestnut are the only witnesses. So during Dunk's eulogy, we're actually introduced to a very important addition to the lore of Game of Thrones. See, pay attention.
What you?
Did you catch it? This is the first time a Game of Thrones show has ever employed flashbacks. Now, in the original series, Bran was able to go view the past, and characters are always talking about the past. But this is the first time the shows have actually shown us past events. And notice they are given this fuzzy edge as a way to show the fuzziness of our memories. And this is actually in line with George R.R. Martin's writing, which uses third-person limited POV chapters, so characters will remember the past, like Ned remembering being with his sister on her deathbed, but he never actually writes POV chapters that take place in the past. So the next day, Dunk wonders what he can do next. He muses on selling the horses to feed himself for a year, but he knows that is not a long-term solution. And then he name drops the two larger cities in his area.
King's Landing, Lannisport.
King's Landing is, of course, the capital of Westeros, and Lannisport is a city on the west coast where the Lannisters came from before they took over Casterly Rock. And then the sword gives him an idea, and he says,
Join the City Watch.
So the City Watch, or the Gold Cloaks, are like the police of King's Landing. Daemon led them in Season 1 of House of the Dragon, and they also arrested Ned Stark in Season 1 of Game of Thrones. So this scene is showing us that Dunk can use a sword.
Stop raping, sir.
But then, in this moment, he makes a decision.
Fits my grip as well as it ever fit his.
This is when Dunk decides that he will be a knight. And this is where I gotta confess something. So, in the Game of Thrones universe, a knight can make another knight. This led to a tearful scene in the show's final season that I'm not gonna spoil for you, but it's awesome. In the book, Dunk claims that Sir Arlen knighted him before he died, and I frankly never questioned that. But lots of fans have pointed out passages where he hesitates to say he's a knight, and this episode makes it clear that Sir Arlen never actually knighted him.
Am I to be a knight one day, sir? As you are?
So the irony here is that Dunk is an honorable, chivalrous man, yet he is not what the realm would call a true knight. But as we've seen all throughout the show, very few of the highborn lords are actually virtuous. It's actually the opposite. They are either cruel or self-interested, like the lords we see later this episode. And then he decides to enter the tournament. So to give you an idea of the geography, at this point he is burying Sir Arlen near Ashford, which is here, in an agrarian area called the Reach. It's south of King's Landing, and it's where they're also holding this tournament. So tournaments were a huge deal in Westeros and very expensive. Kings would throw them to celebrate special occasions, like Robert Baratheon held one to commemorate his son's engagement, and Viserys to commemorate the birth of his son. Normally, a tournament has one champion that everybody challenges, but this particular contest is going to have 5 champions. If Dunk loses, he loses all of his stuff. If he wins, he gets to take the stuff from his opponents. Now, he's hoping to use this as his path to stability, so some High Lord will pay him to be in his service.
So it's like he's sending in an audition to be on Survivor?
Exactly. Now, when he makes this decision, the music swells. It's the classic badass Game of Thrones theme, and we expect this heroic opening credits. But instead, this happens. Now this is immediately telling us that this is a very different kind of Game of Thrones show. It's not about a sweeping historical war or dragons or high lords, it's about the small folk. And sometimes, small folk gotta take a shit. It's also ironic that this is the moment that he decides to fake being a knight. And like he says later on, the only witness is a robin in a tree. He takes Sir Arlen's sword and shield, which bears his insignia, a silver ring chalice. Now his full name is Arlen of Pennytree, but he took his name from his home village of Pennytree, which is just north of River Run in the Riverlands right here. So when Dunk arrives at the inn near Ashford Meadow, he meets Egg. Now there's some cool info about Egg that I'm not going to spoil for you, so if you know, please don't reveal in the comments. He's a really cool character. Let's just say he's a smart kid who's a big fan of knights, like he says.
Do you know every knight in the 7 Kingdoms then?
The good ones.
And then the innkeeper says,
And I never knew a joust to change the price of eggs.
and I gotta think this might be a comment on the post-plague inflation and the high cost of eggs in recent years, but it's also noting how the High Lords are out of touch with the small folk. Like the big guys can play war with each other all they want, but it never changes the life of the ordinary person. Well, at least it doesn't change it for the better. Then this drunk guy tells him,
I dreamed of you. Stay the away from me.
And that's going to be important later in the series, no spoiler for now. Now this is one of the few places where we're going to have some mysticism in the series. All through Game of Thrones, we have seen characters have prophetic dreams. Melisandre, Daemon, Aegon I, Daenerys, Jon Snow, just to name a few. And then he pays with a gold dragon bearing the three-headed insignia of House Targaryen. So this is way too much money to pay for some ale, which is why the innkeeper pockets it as fast as possible. And then Dunk walks in on Egg playing knight on his horse and gives Major Kenny Powers vibes.
You thief!
I did not mean to offend you.
Take that armor off you, now!
No, get down! Get your ass down right now! Hop off there, blonde ambition tour!
And then we see how much of a soft heart Dunk has. He immediately sees a little bit of himself in the boy. After all, they're both people pretending to be knights. And then he shows him some charity.
I know you'll scoop it up as soon as I'm gone.
So when he rides into camp, we see this pavilion with the moon on top. Now this could be from House Royce, which is in the Vale, whose insignia is a crescent moon. But it could also be from House Aaron, whose insignia is a crescent moon in the show. And the crest above the gate is from Ashford, the family that is hosting the tournament. Then Dunk stops in to look at where they're setting up the jousting ring, and this is where the knights will ride and try to knock each other off their horses. And then Dunk takes note of a pavilion with this pennant, a field of stars separated by a lightning bolt. This is the crest of House Dondarrion, but more about them a little later in the video. So this is next to a tent with the lion head at the top with red and gold flags, which probably belongs to House Lannister. So these would be the ancestors of Tyrion, Cersei, and Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. And this banner on the far left is hard to make out, but to me it looks like a checkered background with the lion, which could be from House Osprey. Now they have a big role to play in the second novella titled The Sorin Sword. When Dunk enters the tower to speak to the Master of Games, first we see these two kids playing knights.
You knight?
Oi!
Again, this is like Dunk himself, a man who is playing the role of a knight, and to undercut how out of place he is, he keeps hitting his head harder than a stormtrooper or the Death Star. So the Master of Games makes up a story about their torture device, and afterwards says,
"This is a Reach, not the Riverlands."
And this is because the Reach has traditionally been a very prosperous region with a reputation for being a bit softer. It is ruled by House Tyrell, but secretly, the women of the house have always called the shots in that family. That's one reason why their insignia is a gold rose on a green field. It represents the prosperity of their region and how femininity controls the house. Then he lays out the reasons they don't allow commoners in the games.
Imagine the poor farmer charging down Lionel Baratheon in the lists.
And we do meet Lionel later in the episode, and he is likely the great-grandfather of Robert Baratheon from Game of Thrones. So the Master also mentions how they don't allow sellswords. These are mercenaries who sell their blade to the highest bidder, and he's also trying to ward off landed knights. These are minor knights who hold land, but they still serve a higher lord. Actually, landed knights technically rank above hedge knights in the hierarchy, but they're not traditionally great fighters. And this is where Dunk remembers that he and Sir Arlen were in the service of Lord Manfred Dondarrion, who is the great-grandfather of Beric Dondarrion, the guy with the flaming sword in Game of Thrones. As we see later, his son Manfred has red hair, just like his descendant, Beric. So Dunk finds out that if a lord or a proper knight vouches for him, then he'll be allowed to compete. Dunk says,
Sir Arlen served his lord father in Dorne a few years past.
And Dorne is the southernmost of the Seven Kingdoms. It's where Pedro Pascal's character was from in the original show, and it was also the site of many military excursions over the centuries. In fact, Dorne was just brought into the Seven Kingdoms only a few years before this show began. And then when Dunk lays down a badass line,
"I won't have need of coin,"
it's immediately undercut by him hitting his head, as he says, "7 fucks," referring to the 7 gods who are worshipped as the main religion in the southern region of Westeros. Afterwards, he walks between these pavilions, one with the Stag of House Baratheon and the other with the Beesburys. Now, a former Lord Beesbury met a gross end here in House of the Dragon.
Well, I have no part.
And in the next shot, this guy is tying down a wagon with a post that looks like a gold rose, which is the sigil of House Tyrell. This could be the central post for this green and gold tent that's not quite yet completed. The prostitutes outside of Manfred's pavilion turn Dunk away after explaining what a hedge knight is to the audience.
It's like a knight, but sadder.
And while Dunk sulks in his low economic status, he passes by the Lion of the Lannisters here. And at this point, the Lannisters are still the wealthiest family in the Seven Kingdoms. Then he catches sight of the Fossaways dueling. Now the knight here is Raymond Fossaway of Cider Hall, and their sigil is an apple. So this house goes all the way back to the original settlers of Westeros, the First Men. Their name comes from their ancestor, Foss the Archer, who could shoot apples off of people's heads with stunning accuracy. Now, during the original series, this house took Renly's side in the War of the Five Kings, but then switched over to Stannis Baratheon. But the only time we hear them mentioned in the original show is here.
Father says I have to marry Simon Fossaway.
One thing's for sure, they love referring to themselves as an apple metaphor.
I may not be right, but my cousin's rotten to the core.
knock the seeds out of him.
Quiet.
Though he is the senior branch of the apple tree, which he never ceases to remind me.
After seeing that highborn lords can indeed be assholes, Dunk finds a pavilion of his own, a quiet elm tree. So I love the sound design of this scene. Like the whistle is given like a simple whimsy to the scene, but then the sound of the fly undercuts that sweetness and reminds us that Dunk is still just a poor guy from Flea Bottom. So Dunk walks in on the prostitute in a tent while they're dressing up this woman like she's dead. Remember, we saw stones with painted eyes on Joffrey's grave in Game of Thrones. And then when we find out she's alive, it's a pretty gross realization. So this is obviously kind of like a kink for Lord Manfred's or something.
Shut up. You're meant to be dead.
Dunk is all bashful here because he's never even kissed a girl, let alone seen a naked woman. And then he wanders into a puppet show performed by Tansel. Now, she's telling an ancient story about a knight named Florian the Fool who lived in the Age of Heroes thousands of years in the past. Florian is actually a lot like Dunk, a great fool, but also a great knight. He fell in love with a maiden named Jonquil, just like how Tansel catches Dunk's eye in this scene. Side note, Florian first saw her bathing in a pool in a town that was later called Maidenpool, where the aforementioned village got its name. In fact, that's actually what this puppet show is about. Florian is slaying a dragon in order to save his love, Jonquil. Florian is mentioned several times in the books because Sansa loves stories about Florian. And in the book, there's also a parallel between Florian and Dantos. That's the night that Sansa convinced Joffrey to turn into a fool.
From this day, you'll be my new fool.
So thematically, Sansa was Jonquil and Dantos was her Florian. Now, at the puppet show, they portray the dragon puppet actually much larger than it is in the book. And it's really effective here because remember, the dragons have been dead for decades. This is the closest thing to a real dragon these people have ever seen. Raymond calls him
half man, half giant.
Because remember, giants do exist in Game of Thrones, but most people think they're just legends. When Dunk meets Raymond, notice his hesitation when Raymond says that he's only a squire.
Fight well for a squire.
So Dunk is just getting the hang of pretending to be a knight. So then he kind of works his way into the Baratheon party, and notice how this joint is covered in stag antlers, all around the outside of the pavilion, on the chandeliers inside, and of course on Lionel's crown. Now that crown is actually foreshadowing that Robert Baratheon will become king, and their sigil becomes a crowned stag. So Dunk attacks the buffet like a poor kid spending the night at his friend's house. I was that poor kid. The party is being hosted by Lionel Baratheon, head of his house, Lord of the Stormlands, and he's called the Laughing Storm because of his habit of laughing at his opponents during battle. And Storm, of course, because his castle is the thick-walled structure called Storm's End. In his speech, he says,
4,000 years ago, our ancestors gathered in that big field.
And he's referring to the invasion of the Andals. That's the second group of settlers to come into Westeros who followed the first men. And then he gets bored and cuts his own speech short and gets the party rolling, offering 100 gold to whoever can beat him on the list. Now this kind of bravado is still in his family 100 years later when Robert Baratheon wants to compete in the joust melee.
That was funny, is it?
Now when Dunk gets called over to Lionel's table, he points out that the big men like Dunk always attract trouble.
Big men get punched more than little men, did you know that?
Well, yeah, because dudes are always trying to take down a big man to prove how strong they are.
That is true, and I won't spoil anything, but we do see examples of this throughout the books. Dunk is always the biggest, the strongest guy, but he would always rather avoid a fight. It's one of his key character traits. Lionel mentions a Lord Catherine, and 70 years later, during Robert's rebellion, his descendant sides with Robert, until he was killed by Randall Tarley, Sam Tarley's dad. And he actually killed him in the same location of this tournament, Ashford. And after he makes him laugh,
So supper.
Actually makes sense.
we see Dunk throw down on the dance floor. And then we enter this weird kind of pissing contest of a dance, where Lionel tries to stomp on Dunk's feet, you know, like he warned him.
Big men get punched more than little men, did you know that?
I think he's wanting to see if Dunk will let him stomp his feet, like all the ass kissers who surround him. But then Dunk impresses him by fighting back and winning. And then we get this smash cut where Dunk is wearing the crown. Now it's funny, but it is important because it shows that Dunk has temporarily been granted a higher status, but just for a few moments. Lionel wants to associate with the common people.
Yeah, but he'll never feel whatever common people feel.
He's telling Duncan a story about when he went to sea and nearly drowned himself.
But I come to find what men do when they die at sea.
And this attitude of pushing himself was also demonstrated when he tried to stomp on Dunk's feet. He's been handed everything in his life, so he's become kind of a thrill seeker. He tells Dunk,
Within every man there are many men.
and this line has two very different meanings for these two men. For Lionel, the men living inside him are his ancestors. He believes that his family line gives him the ability to face death.
If they had done it, I could do it too.
But for Dunk, he's got two men living inside of him. In reality, he's a squire from Flea Bottom with no prospects. But he's trying to reach a higher status, to be a knight, and he believes in the honorable life of being a knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But then as soon as he tries to get advice from Lionel, the Lord becomes disinterested and starts to feel around on his plate for food.
We have no chance.
And after Lionel feeds him a line about the honor of competing, he has to remind him that he is flat fucking broke.
And I won't be able to ransom back my own horse.
And I loved Lionel's response.
A knight without a horse is no knight at all.
He could have offered to help him, to sponsor him, to take him into his service, but instead all he can say is,
I don't know. I'm really quite drunk.
It's a way of saying, look man, I'm only talking to you because we're partying. Tomorrow you'll go back to being Dunk the Lunk from Flea Bottom, and I'll still be a Lord of Westeros. And he illustrates this by plucking the crown from Dunk's head, and Cinderella then has to go home from the ball. But notice, Lionel bumps his crown on the chandelier, like Dunk keeps bumping his head. It's subtle, but it's showing how they're actually equal. Two regular men who can also make mistakes. Now, this conversation does give Dunk the courage to approach Lord Dondarrion. Like Lionel, he's just there for the party and, prurient pleasures. Dunk says,
He serves your Lord Father to hunt the Vulture King in the Red Mountains.
Now, the Vulture King is more of a title.
Like the Dread Pirate Roberts.
Exactly. It's a title for an outlaw in the Red Mountains, which border Dorne. Now, the Vulture King he's referring to was the fourth and final Vulture King. After Dorne was brought into the kingdom, there were no more outlaw rebellions against the crown by that name. And this Vulture King was actually defeated by Lord Dondarrion, Manfred's dad. And then Dunk finds out that this economic ladder is impossible to climb.
Much like the Pearl of John Steinbeck.
Exactly. So when Dunk finds no headway into the upper echelons of society, he retreats to his own open sky pavilion, the Elm Tree. But Egg is waiting for him, and what Egg offers here is a change of perspective. See, when Egg is around, Dunk finally does have upper status. He gets to be the knight, and Egg is the squire. But Egg is actually much smarter than Dunk, and in most ways better informed about the customs of Westeros, especially knighthood. So when he hears that Egg is from King's Landing, he assumes
You're from Flea Bottom.
which is where Dunk is from. So he starts to see himself in this kid. And this is partly why he decides to take him in.
You won't go hungry.
That, and also the kid is awesome. He made him dinner and cleaned all of his stuff. So of course he's going to bring him into his fold. So this conversation is important because it's where Dunk learns that a change in perspective can also change his life. He tells Egg,
Sooner sleep under the stars than in some smoky tent.
but Dunk doesn't really believe this yet. He wishes he were in a cozy tent and not sleeping outside. But Egg is the one who points out that it's special that they're outside because they got to see the falling star. So with Egg around, Dunk can see the bright side of his situation, and maybe he can earn a little bit of luck in the world. So guys, that's all I can say about the episode without spoiling the story for you. I cannot wait to cover this show. It is such a fun book. Is there anything that I missed? Was I mistaken about anything? You can let me know down in the comments below, or on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, or on my Substack. You can follow or subscribe there. It would be a huge help. Or you can find us on our free-to-join Discord server. And don't forget to click our link below to download War Thunder today and get huge bonuses for a limited time only. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.